The solvent tank on Luther's back weighed 40 pounds, a constant dull pressure against his spine that felt less like a piece of equipment and more like a physical manifestation of his life choices. The rhythmic swish hiss of the sonic scrubber moving across the deck plates was the only music he knew anymore. It was 3 in the morning on Glimmer Spoke Station, specifically in the lower mercantile quadrant, known as the sump, where the air recyclers always wheezed and the neon advertisements flickered with the desperate manic energy of a dying star. Luther paused to wipe sweat from his forehead with the back of a glove that was stained with 3 different colors of alien hydraulic fluid. He was 42 years old human and possessed the kind of face that people looked at and immediately forgot. It was a useful trait for a janitor. "Hey, muckdragger." Luther did not turn around immediately. He finished the pass with the scrubber, ensuring the patch of synthetic vomit, likely from a Tellarite who had consumed too much fermented algae, was completely dissolved. Only then did he straighten up and turn. A Vargan merchant was leaning over the counter of his stall, his 4 eyes narrowing in what Luther assumed was disdain, though with Vargans it could also be indigestion. The creature tapped a claw on the walkway. "You missed a spot, muckdragger," the merchant spat. "My customers do not pay premium credits to walk on filth. This is the gateway to the core, not a human landfill." Luther looked at the spot. It was clean. It was cleaner than the merchant's own chitinous hands. But Luther knew the script. He had performed this play 1,000 times. "My apologies," Luther said, his voice flat practiced. "I will go over it again." "See that you do," the Vargan sneered, turning back to his wares. "They call you the janitor of the galaxy, but you cannot even keep one hallway shiny." Luther reactivated the scrubber. Janitor of the galaxy. It was a joke aimed at the human diaspora on the station, most of whom ended up in maintenance or waste disposal. He pushed the machine forward. He did not have an ego, or so he told himself. Ego was expensive. Ego required energy. He just wanted to finish his shift, collect his 150 credits, and go back to his hab unit to sleep until the artificial sun cycle began. But as he stared at the reflection in the metal floor, distorted by the vibrations of the scrubber, he felt that familiar, sharp sting in his chest. It was not pain. It was the ache of being a ghost in a machine made of flesh and steel. He was background noise. He was texture. He reached the end of the corridor near the heavy blast doors that led to the primary technical shafts. The air here was cooler smelling of ozone and old grease. He bent down to check the intake valve on his scrubber. The blast door did not slide open with its usual hydraulic groan. It exploded outward. Luther threw himself flat against the wall, covering his head, as a cloud of pressurized steam hissed into the corridor. The heavy locking mechanism sheared off and clattered across the floor, spinning like a coin. 2 figures stumbled out of the smoke, crashing onto the deck plates. Luther blinked, his heart hammering against his ribs. They were Fenryi. He recognized the species instantly, tall, lupine humanoids with dense muscle structures and eyes that usually glowed with predatory intelligence. But these 2 were different. They were young, barely out of adolescence by the look of their slender frames. And they were naked, not just unclothed. In Fenryi culture, armor was a second skin, and ceremonial sashes denoted lineage. To be without them was to be less than nothing. These 2 wore absolutely nothing but their own silver-gray fur, which was matted with sweat and grime. They looked terrified. The male, slightly taller, scrambled to his feet, pulling the female up with him. They backed away from the open shaft, their chests heaving. Luther's universal translator earpiece buzzed, trying to lock onto their pheromonal dialect. The machine voice crackled in his ear. Subject status exposed. Interpretation without honor, without layers, naked. The male youth looked at Luther. His golden eyes were wide, the pupils blown out in sheer panic. He said something in a guttural, rapid-fire dialect. Luther's translator glitched, struggling to parse the ritualistic context of the word the boy used. The synthetic voice in Luther's ear offered a translation that was technically accurate, but contextually disastrous. Do not look. We are feeling the shame of skin. Luther, still pressed against the wall, with his scrubber, felt the absurdity of the moment collide with his fear. He looked at the two terrified alien royalty, looked down at his own stained gray jumpsuit, and the words slipped out before he could stop them. "I am also that," Luther said, holding up his hands. "But I am wearing a uniform, so maybe it cancels out." The twins stared at him. The joke did not land. It crashed and burned. Then the lights in the corridor died. They did not flicker. They were severed. The only illumination came from the distant neon of the market stalls behind them, and the emergency strip lighting running along the floor. From the dark mouth of the technical shaft, shapes emerged. They moved like oil sliding over water. There were 6 of them. They wore masks made of polished black bone carved into the shape of snarling maws with elongated teeth. They made no sound, no footsteps, no breathing. In their hands they held weapons that Luther had only seen in history files. Curved blades made of localized hard light fields, crackling with a temperature so low they smoked in the humid air. Ice blades. The Fenrir girl, Tessa, let out a sound that was half whimper, half growl. She pressed her back against her brother Alden. They were cornered. Luther's brain screamed at him to run. "This is not your shift. This is not your problem. You are the janitor. You clean up the blood. You do not spill it." He reached for his belt to tap the security panic button. His fingers fumbled with the clasp. One of the masked figures stepped forward. The movement was liquid, terrifyingly graceful. The figure raised the ice blade. It was not aimed to kill instantly. It was aimed to maim. Luther looked at Tessa. He saw the way her claws dug into her brother's arm, drawing blood. He saw the absolute primal terror in her eyes. It was the look of a creature that knew it had been discarded by the universe. Luther knew that look. He saw it in the mirror every morning. "Don't do it," he thought. "Don't you dare do it, Luther." He stepped away from the wall. "Hey!" Luther shouted. His voice cracked, echoing pitifully in the vast corridor. "Maintenance in progress. This area is closed." It was the stupidest thing anyone had ever said in the history of the Glimmer Spoke Station. The lead assassin turned its head slowly. The black bone mask stared at Luther. For a second, the universe paused. Then the assassin moved. It was not a charge. It was a blur. Luther raised his sonic scrubber like a shield, a pathetic gesture against high-tech zealots. The assassin batted the 40-pound machine aside, as if it were made of paper. The metal tank slammed into the wall, rupturing and spraying solvent everywhere. Luther was thrown to his knees. Alden roared a young breaking sound and tried to lunge, but 2 more assassins pinned the twins to the wall. They did not strike to kill. They held the twins there, forcing them to watch. The leader stood over Luther. "The unfurred walk must be consecrated," the assassin whispered. The voice was modulated, sounding like grinding stones. "The witness must bleed for the silence." It wasn't a fight. It was an execution of the spirit. The first blade struck. It felt like being burned by dry ice. The blade sliced across Luther's shoulder, cauterizing the wound instantly, with cold, leaving a trail of dead frozen nerves. Luther screamed. The second blade took him across the ribs. The third, across the thigh. They were dancing. It was the dance of the 18 blades, a ritual of torture meant to strip a warrior of their will. But Luther was not a warrior. He was a janitor. He didn't have a warrior's will to strip. He only had the stubborn endurance of a man who had cleaned up everyone else's messes for 20 years. "Stop," Luther gasped, his vision swimming in red and black. "They're just kids." The assassin did not stop. 4, 5, 6. Luther curled into a ball on the floor. He could hear Tessa screaming for them to stop, her voice high and terrified. The sound anchored him. If he passed out, they would move on to the twins. He had to stay awake. He had to be the object of their focus. 7, 8. The pain was a white noise that drowned out the station's hum. He wondered where security was. He wondered where the legendary Vanguard were, the elite warriors who were supposed to protect the Fenrir heirs. Late, Luther thought, a hysterical giggle bubbling up in his throat amidst the agony. Everyone is always late except the janitor. 9, 10. The blade sliced across his chest deep. This one was different. It lingered. The assassin was carving something. A script. A message. Luther's blood, hot and red, spilled out, despite the cauterizing cold of the blades. It pooled beneath him, mixing with the solvent from his broken tank. The floor beneath him was not standard deck plating. It was an older section of the station, a decorative junction made of imported basalt and inlaid with conductive alloys. It was a heritage site that people walked over without noticing. Luther's blood seeped into the grooves of a dormant inlay. 11, 12. The assassin raised the blade for a strike to the face, and then the floor screamed. It was a sound felt rather than heard, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through Luther's bones louder than the pain. The inlay beneath him drank his blood and flared with a blinding violet light. The assassin recoiled, shielding the mask's eye slits. The light did not scatter. It focused. It shot upward, straight into Luther's chest, directly into the fresh carving wound. Luther arched his back, his mouth opening in a silent scream. The sensation was not cold like the blades. It was fire. It was molten lead being poured into his veins. He felt something latch onto his heart, weaving into his nervous system like a parasite finding a home. The mark on his chest, the fang crest, burned itself into his flesh, searing the skin, fusing with the bone of his sternum. The blast of energy knocked the assassins back. The leader stumbled, the ice blade flickering and dying. From the far end of the corridor, the heavy thud of armored boots finally echoed. "Secure the perimeter!" a voice roared. "Leave nothing standing!" The Vanguard had arrived. Bolts of plasma tore through the air, illuminating the smoke. The assassins, realizing their ritual had been botched by a glowing janitor, turned and vanished back into the technical shafts with impossible speed. Luther lay on his back. The ceiling was spinning. The lights of the station seemed to be pulsing in time with the frantic, agonizing beat of his heart. Thump, thump, flash, thump, thump, flash. A shadow fell over him. He saw silver armor. He saw the face of a wolf, terrified and angry. Astra. He recognized her from the news feeds, the commander of the Vanguard. She looked down at him, but she didn't look like a rescuer. She looked horrified. Before the darkness took him completely, a voice crackled over the station's public address system. It bypassed the local feeds, overriding the safety protocols. It was a voice that sounded like tearing metal. "The key has tasted the blood of the low," the voice intoned. It was Prelate Morrow. Luther knew that voice from the religious broadcasts no one listened to. "The vault of teeth hungers. The unfurred have failed. The cycle is broken. We wait for the shattering. Vault of teeth," Luther thought. That sounds expensive to clean. Then the darkness swallowed him whole. Luther woke up to the smell of antiseptic and wet fur. It was a distinct olfactory combination that could only mean one place: the Fenrir medical ward. He tried to take a deep breath, but his chest felt like it had been encased in tight iron bands. Vital signs stabilizing. A medical drone chimed softly from somewhere to his left. Syntho-skin grafting complete at 80%. Pain receptors dampened. Luther opened his eyes. The light was harsh, blue-white, designed for eyes that perceived a different spectrum than his own. He blinked, trying to clear the grit from his vision. He was in a private containment unit. It was large, circular, and lined with biobeds. But what drew his attention immediately were the statues standing around the room. No, not statues. 6 Vanguard warriors stood in a perfect circle around his bed. They were 7 feet tall, clad in ceremonial armor that looked like woven silver and ceramic. Their helmets were off, revealing faces that were stoic, fierce, and distinctly unhappy. Their ears were pinned back against their skulls, a sign of aggression, or perhaps extreme tension. Luther shifted his weight. The sheet covering him slid down to his waist. He looked down at his chest. The bandages had been removed. In the center of his sternum, sprawling out toward his shoulders like a spiderweb of scars, was the brand. It wasn't just a burn. The flesh was raised intricate, glowing with a faint, pulsing violet luminescence. It looked like a stylized jaw, open and ready to bite. The fang crest. "Don't touch it," a voice said. Sharp, cold. Luther froze his hand, hovering inches from his own chest. Astra stepped through the ring of guards. She was imposing even without her helmet. Her fur was a pale, icy gray, and a scar ran vertically through her left eye, though the eye itself remained functional and piercingly blue. She wore the cloak of a commander, but right now, she looked like a warden. She stopped at the foot of his bed, crossing her arms over her chest plate. The ceramic clicked. "You are awake," she said. It was an accusation, not an observation. "I think so," Luther rasped. His throat was dry. "Unless this is a very detailed hallucination caused by the solvent fumes." Astra did not smile. She leaned forward, her nostrils flaring slightly as she took in his scent. "You took 18 cuts. By all biological metrics of your species, you should be dead. Shock alone should have stopped your heart." "I have a high pain tolerance," Luther said weakly. "I've been married twice." One of the guards behind Astra made a low, rumbling sound in his throat. Astra silenced him with a flick of her ear. "This is not a time for human humor," Astra said. "Do you know what you have done, Janitor?" "I tried to stop some guys in masks from hurting the kids," Luther said, feeling a spark of defensiveness. "And please, my name is Luther, not Janitor." "You interfered in the unfurred walk," Astra said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You spilled your blood on the gateway seal, and now," she pointed a clawed finger at his chest, "you are wearing the royal key." "I didn't ask for it," Luther said. "Can you scrub it off, laser it? I have a shift at 5. Astra stared at him, as if he had just asked to scrub the moon out of the sky. "It is bonded to your nervous system. To remove it would be to strip your nerves from your spine." Luther swallowed hard. "Okay, that sounds permanent." "It is worse than permanent," Astra said. "It is blasphemy. That crest has not been seen for 3,000 cycles. It belongs to the High King, not to a—" She struggled for a word that wouldn't be an insult and failed. "A cleaner." "Don't move," she added, though he hadn't moved. "You are a problem. A catastrophic political theological problem." From the corner of the room, a shadow shifted. Luther craned his neck. Alden and Tessa were sitting on a bench in the far corner. They were dressed now wearing simple gray tunics, but they looked small, diminished. Tessa was hugging her knees to her chest. Alden was staring at the floor, his jaw set in a line of shame. "Hey," Luther said softly. The twins looked up. Tessa's eyes were red-rimmed. "You're alive," Tessa whispered. Her voice trembled. "Mostly," Luther said. He tried to sit up a little straighter, ignoring the pulling sensation in his chest. "You two okay? No holes?" "We are unhurt," Alden said. His tone was stiff, trying to mimic the warriors around him, but it cracked. "Because you shielded us. You took the markings." "Yeah, well," Luther managed a crooked grin, though it hurt his face. "I figured I didn't have any tattoos yet. Wanted to see what the fuss was about." "It is not a tattoo," Alden said, his voice rising with sudden, unexpected anger. "It is the curse of the witness. You stole the burden it was supposed to be ours to endure." "Alden!" Astra snapped. The boy flinched and looked down. Luther looked at the boy, really looked at him. He saw the guilt eating him alive. The boy was angry, because he felt he had failed. He had let the help save him. "I didn't steal anything, kid," Luther said, his voice gentle. I just saw a knife. I saw you. My feet moved. I didn't verify the diplomatic protocols first. Sorry about that. Alden didn't answer. Tessa wiped her nose with her sleeve, a very unroyal gesture. Thank you, she whispered. Astra stepped between Luther and the twins, blocking his view. That is enough. The council is convening. They are demanding to see the vessel. Vessel, Luther asked. I'm a person, Luther. Remember. To them you are a container for a holy relic, Astra said. And right now half of them want to cut you open to retrieve it, and the other half want to eject you out of an airlock to see if the relic survives vacuum. Great options, Luther muttered. I assume you're the third option. I am the option that keeps you breathing until I figure out why the Crest chose you, Astra said. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and deep, abiding annoyance. Do not give me a reason to change my mind. She turned to leave, signaling the guards to tighten the perimeter. Wait, Luther called out. Astra paused, looking back over her shoulder. That voice on the comms, Luther said. Morrow. He said vault of teeth. What is that? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The guards stiffened. Alden and Tessa looked up, terror flashing across their faces again. Astra turned fully around. Her expression was unreadable, but her tail was perfectly still. Where did you hear that name? Before I passed out. He said the key tasted blood. He said the vault hungers. Astra walked back to the bed. She leaned down until her face was inches from his. He could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes. He could smell the ozone and steel on her armor. If you value your tongue, human, she hissed, never speak those words again. The vault is a myth, a ghost story to scare pups. He didn't sound like he was telling a ghost story, Luther said. He sounded like he was giving a sermon. Astra stared at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, she spun on her heel and marched out of the medical bay. The doors hissed shut behind her. Luther sank back against the pillow. He was exhausted. His chest felt like it was housing a nuclear reactor. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Suddenly, the rhythm changed. It wasn't the monitor. It was coming from inside him. A low, thrumming sound audible in the silence of the room. Luther opened his eyes. The violet light from the crest on his chest was pulsing. Not randomly. It was pulsing in perfect sync with his heartbeat. Thump. The overhead lights in the medical bay dimmed. Thump. The lights surged, glowing brighter than their safety rating. Thump. The medical drone near his bed twitched and powered down its lights, dying. Luther held his breath. The pulsing stopped. The lights stabilized. The twins were staring at him from the corner, their eyes wide. The remaining Vanguard warriors had taken a step back, their hands hovering over their weapons. Luther looked at the ceiling, at the metal plates that separated him from the cold void of space. He had the distinct, terrifying sensation that the station wasn't just holding him anymore. It was listening to him. Well, Luther whispered to the empty air. That's going to make changing light bulbs complicated. The sensation of having one's skeletal structure reknit by microscopic machines was less like healing and more like having a colony of industrious ants building a skyscraper inside one's marrow. Luther lay on the biobed, staring at the ceiling of the medical ward, listening to the wet, clicking sounds of the reconstruction field. He had been in this state for 48 hours. His chest, where the 18 blades had done their work, felt heavy. Not with pain, the nerve blockers were doing their job efficiently, but with a density that did not belong to him. The fang crest was not just a scar on the surface. It went deep. It had roots. Dr. Grace leaned over him, her face framed by the harsh halo of the surgical lights. She was a woman of 50, with gray hair pulled back into a severe bun that defied gravity, and Luther suspected several laws of physics. She held a scanner that hummed with a worried pitch. You are a biological marvel, Luther, she said, though her tone suggested she found marvels to be annoying administrative hurdles. The Fenrir bone weavers have repaired your sternum, your ribs, and the punctured lung. But this, she tapped the air above his chest. This is not biological. It is integrating with your sympathetic nervous system. It is drinking your bioelectricity. Luther tried to sit up. The movement was stiff, like he was wearing a corset made of lead. Drinking sounds parasitic, doctor. I prefer the term rent-controlled tenant. Grace did not smile. She lowered the scanner. It is not a joke. Your neural pathways are being rewritten to accommodate the signal load. If we tried to surgically remove it, the shock would scramble your brain before the laser even cut the skin. So I am stuck with it, Luther said. He looked down. The violet markings were dull right now, sleeping under the thin hospital gown. Like a bad decision from a shore leave. Worse, a voice came from the doorway. Like a destiny you are too small to carry. Astra walked in. She had not left the room in 2 days, except to issue orders to the perimeter guard. Her armor was still pristine, but her eyes, those piercing, predatory blue eyes, looked tired. The fur around her neck was flattened, a sign of exhaustion Luther had learned to recognize from working alongside Fenrir dockhands. She stopped at the foot of the bed. The council calls it the mark of the gatekeeper, Astra said. Her voice was devoid of the reverence one might expect for a religious title. To her, it sounded like a tactical error. In the oldest songs, the gatekeeper was the one who stood between the tribe and the void. He who opened the path when the sky burned. Luther rubbed the back of his neck. Look, Commander, I appreciate the mythology, but I am a janitor. The only gates I open are the ones to the sanitation maintenance closets, and occasionally the executive washroom when the sensor malfunctions. I am not opening paths to the void. Astra stared at him. The silence stretched uncomfortable and heavy. A Fenrir stare was a physical thing. It weighed on the skin. She did not blink. She did not find the absurdity of the situation amusing. The Crest does not make mistakes, she said finally, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. It reacts to the resonance of protection. You bled for the heirs. The mechanism accepted the trade. It was 18 stabs, Luther muttered. It felt less like a trade and more like a butchery. It was the dance, Astra corrected him sharply. And you survived it. That makes you complicated. Before Luther could respond, the heavy blast doors of the ward slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The air pressure in the room shifted, carrying the scent of expensive incense and ozone. Orin walked in. The father of the twins was a striking figure even by Fenrir standards. He wore the flowing, high-collared robes of a diplomat, woven from silk that shimmered with changing patterns of light. He was tall, his fur a deep, lustrous charcoal, but his face carried the weight of 1,000 negotiations. He did not walk like a warrior. He walked like a man walking on ice that was too thin to hold him. Behind him, the twins Alden and Tessa shuffled in. They looked cleaner now, dressed in proper tunics, but they still carried the shrinking posture of children who had been caught breaking something expensive. Orin stopped before Luther's bed and bowed. It was not a deep bow, not the bow of a subordinate to a superior, but the calculated bow of an equal, acknowledging a debt. Luther of Earth, Orin said. His voice was melodic, trained for the Senate floor. I am Orin High Diplomat of the Fenrir Coalition, and I am the father of the reckless children you shielded with your body. They were just scared, Luther said, waving a hand dismissively. Anyone would have done it. No, Orin said softly. Most would have run. Many would have filmed it. You stood. He stepped closer, his golden eyes scanning the violet brand on Luther's chest. The diplomat's expression tightened for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of fear, before smoothing back into professional gratitude. I owe you a debt that does not fit in any language, Orin continued. You saved the bloodline, but you must understand the position this places us in, the Fang Crest. It is a symbol of authority that predates the coalition. For a human to wear it, a human of the service caste, is to upend the social order of Glimmerspoke. Luther sat up straighter, ignoring the twinge in his chest. I am not trying to upend anything. I just want to go back to my shift. If you want the crest back, figure out how to peel it off. Orin sighed, a sound that rattled in his chest. It is not that simple. My political opponents, led by Prelate Morrow, are already using this. They claim I staged the attack to give the crest to an outsider to insult the traditions. They claim you are a puppet I hired. Luther laughed, a dry barking sound. A puppet, sir. I make 12 credits an hour. If I were a mercenary, I would at least demand dental coverage. Morrow does not care about truth, Orin said gravely. He cares about the vault. He believes the crest is the key to opening the vault of teeth. That name again, Luther said. Astra told me it was a ghost story. Orin glanced at Astra. The commander looked away, her jaw set. It is a story we tell ourselves is dead, Orin said. But stories have a way of waking up when blood is spilled. Listen to me, Luther. You are no longer just a man. You are a piece on a board you cannot see. Until this political storm passes, you must remain here under the protection of the vanguard. Protection, Luther looked at the circle of armored warriors. This feels like containment. For your own safety, Orin said. He placed a hand on Alden's shoulder, squeezing it tight enough that the boy winced. And for theirs. If Morrow takes you, he takes the future of my house. Orin turned to leave. The audience concluded. The twins lingered for a moment. Tessa looked back, her eyes wide and wet, mouthing a silent, "I'm sorry," before being ushered out by her father's aides. Luther slumped back against the pillows. He felt the trap closing. He wasn't a hero. He was evidence. Later that evening, the lights in the ward were dimmed to a twilight blue to simulate the Fenrir nocturnal cycle. Luther could not sleep. The itching in his chest was maddening, a sensation of something moving just beneath the skin. Dr. Grace returned ostensibly to check his vitals, but she closed the privacy curtain around his biobed with a deliberate snap. "Hold still," she whispered, pulling a small, unauthorized device from her pocket. It looked like a modified Geiger counter. "Doctor, if that is another needle, I am going to file a complaint," Luther whispered back. "Quiet," Grace hissed. She ran the device over his chest. It didn't click. It whined, a high-frequency sound that made Luther's teeth ache. "I ran the spectral analysis on the energy signature of the crest," Grace said, her voice barely audible. "Luther, this isn't just reacting to your nervous system. It is broadcasting." "Broadcasting to who? Not who. Where?" Grace turned the device screen toward him. It showed a complex 3D map of Glimmerspoke Station. A red line pulsed from the medical bay, diving straight down through the mercantile decks, through the engineering sectors, past the waste reclamation plants, deep into the station's foundational struts. "It is pinging a server node that doesn't exist on the blueprints, something deeper than the reactor core." "The vault," Luther said. The word felt cold on his tongue. "I don't know what a vault of teeth is," Grace said, "but the signal modulation is ancient. We are talking pre-contact era. Before humans, before the coalition. This station was built on top of something else, Luther. And whatever is down there, it just woke up because you plugged yourself into the Wi-Fi." "I didn't plug into anything," Luther protested. "I got stabbed." "Same thing, apparently," Grace said grimly. "Listen to me. You need to be careful. Orin thinks this is politics. Morrow thinks it is religion. But looking at this data, this is engineering. And engineers don't build locks that complex unless they are trying to keep something very dangerous inside." Before Luther could ask what she meant, the air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure drop. The hairs on Luther's arms stood up. The violet light of the fang crest flared suddenly bright enough to show the outline of his ribs through his skin. "Get down," Luther said. He didn't know why he said it. The words bypassed his brain. "What?" Grace frowned. The ventilation grate above the bed exploded. It wasn't a bomb. It was a person. A figure dropped from the ceiling, landing in a crouch on the foot of Luther's bed. This assassin wore no mask. He was a Fenrir stripped to the waist, his fur shaved into patterns of jagged script. His eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites, and foam flecked the corners of his mouth. A berserker. He held a monolithic vibro knife, buzzing with a nasty yellow energy field. Grace screamed and scrambled back, knocking over a tray of instruments. The berserker didn't look at her. He didn't look at Luther's face. He looked at Luther's chest. "Liberate the key!" the assassin shrieked, raising the knife. He wasn't trying to kill Luther. He was trying to carve the sternum out. Time seemed to slow down. Luther saw the blade coming down. It was a slow, terrifying arc. He knew with absolute certainty that he could not dodge it. He was a 42-year-old man with healing ribs. He was not a ninja. He did the only thing he could do. He raised his hands and squeezed his eyes shut, wishing he was anywhere else. Wishing he was safe. Protect. The thought wasn't a word. It was a command that fired from the base of his brain, traveled down his spine, and slammed into the fang crest. Hum, crack. The sound was like a thunderclap in a jar. Luther opened his eyes. The knife had stopped 6 inches from his chest. It wasn't hovering. It was pressed against a wall that wasn't there. The air between Luther and the assassin was shimmering, distorting like heat haze over asphalt. The violet light from the crest had expanded, forming a geometric barrier of translucent hexagons. The assassin roared and pushed harder. The vibroblade sparked and hissed against the hard light shield. Luther felt amazing. It was a terrifying sensation. The pain in his chest vanished, replaced by a rush of endorphins and raw power that tasted like sugar and copper. He could feel the shield. It wasn't a tool. It was an extension of his will. He could feel the assassin's strength pushing against him, and he could feel how easy it would be to push back. It was seductive. It was the feeling of finally, after a lifetime of being small, being the unmovable object. "Get off my bed," Luther gritted his teeth. He shoved his hands forward. The hexagonal shield expanded explosively. It hit the assassin like a freight train. The Fenrir was launched backward, flying across the room. He smashed through the privacy curtain, hit the opposite wall with a bone-crunching thud, and slid to the floor unconscious. The shield vanished instantly. Luther collapsed back onto the mattress, gasping. The rush of power was gone, replaced by a nausea so sudden and violent he almost retched. He felt hollowed out. The doors burst open. Astra and the Vanguard poured in, weapons raised. They saw the unconscious assassin. They saw Grace trembling in the corner. And they saw Luther clutching his chest, smoke rising faintly from his skin. Astra lowered her weapon slowly. She looked at the dent in the metal wall where the assassin had impacted. Then she looked at Luther. Her expression was no longer just annoyed. It was bewildered. "You are not a warrior," Astra whispered. "You have no training. You have no bioamps." "I pushed him," Luther wheezed. "I just pushed." "No," Astra said, walking over to inspect the assassin. "You projected a kinetic barrier of Class 4 density. That requires years of mental conditioning to shape." She turned to face him. "Who are you really, Luther?" "I told you," Luther groaned, wiping sweat from his eyes. "I am the guy who mops the floors. Maybe I just really hate people walking on my clean floors." Astra did not laugh. She looked at him with a new kind of intensity. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was the realization that the tool she was guarding might be a weapon. The next morning, the containment became literal. Luther was moved to a high-security wing of the Fenrir consulate within the station. The windows were armored. The door was guarded by 2 Vanguard, who didn't blink. Oren's diplomatic approach had failed. The attack in the medical bay had proven that the consulate was compromised. Alden and Tessa came to visit him. This time, they sat on the floor near his chair, a breach of protocol that the guards pretended not to see. "Tell me about the walk," Luther said, breaking the silence. He was eating a nutrient bar that tasted like cardboard and vitamins. "Why were you naked? Why no weapons? It seems unwise in a station full of people who want to stab you." Alden picked at a loose thread on his tunic. "It is the unfurred walk. It is the oldest law. To lead the pack, one must know what it is to be prey. We strip away the armor, the rank, the technology. We must walk from one end of the territory to the other, relying only on our instincts." "And if you get killed?" Luther asked. "Then we were not worthy to lead," Tessa said softly. "Nature culls the weak." Luther put down the nutrient bar. "That is stupid." The twins looked up shocked. "I mean it," Luther said. "Nature is a bully. Civilization is supposed to be about protecting the weak so they can become strong. If you cull the weak, you just end up with a bunch of strong idiots who don't know how to build anything." Alden frowned, thinking. "Our father says tradition is the glue of society." "Sometimes glue is just old paste that smells bad," Luther said. "You were scared in that corridor. That wasn't weakness. That was intelligence. You knew you were outmatched. A true leader would have called for backup, not died for a metaphor." Tessa giggled. It was a small sound, but it lightened the room. "You talk strangely, like you do not care about honor." "I care about staying alive," Luther said. "Honor is great, but it is hard to enjoy when you are dead." The door opened. Astra entered. She carried a datapad and looked grimmer than usual. "You have an audience," she said to Luther. "Watch the screen." She activated the wall monitor. The image of Prelate Morrow filled the screen. He was standing on a balcony overlooking the central plaza of Glimmer Spoke. Thousands of Fenrai were gathered below, holding torches of blue chemical fire. "The human witchcraft has infected our holy halls," Morrow's voice boomed. He was a charismatic speaker, his voice rising and falling like a tide. "The diplomat Orin seeks to dilute our blood. He has grafted the sacred key onto a human scavenger, a man of trash. He uses dark technology to mimic the miracles of the gatekeeper." The crowd roared in anger. "He calls you a false marker," Astra said, turning off the sound but leaving the image. "He is whipping them into a frenzy. He claims you are using human tech to enslave the minds of the heirs." "I can't even program my toaster to the right setting," Luther muttered. "How do they believe this? Fear is a powerful lens," Astra said. "And you are convenient. You are an outsider. It is easier to hate you than to hate their own leaders." Luther watched the silent, angry faces on the screen. He felt a knot of dread in his stomach. He wanted to go home. He wanted to be invisible again. He wanted to be the guy people walked past without seeing. But then he looked at Alden and Tessa. They were watching the screen too, and they looked terrified. They knew those torches were meant for them, as much as for Luther. "What happens now?" Luther asked. "Orin is losing control of the council," Astra admitted. Her voice was low. "There is a vote of no confidence scheduled for tomorrow. If Orin falls, Morrow takes command of the security forces. He will come for you, and he will come for the twins." "And you?" Luther asked. "You command the Vanguard. Who do you serve?" Astra looked at him. "I serve the Crest, wherever it is." "Even if it is on a janitor." Astra hesitated. Then she sighed. "Even then, though the universe is testing my patience." She walked to the window, looking out at the starfield. "I cannot hold this floor forever. If the mob breaches the perimeter, I cannot guarantee your safety. Orin wants to negotiate, but Morrow does not want a negotiation. He wants a coronation." She turned back to him, and for the first time, Luther saw a crack in her icy demeanor. She looked worried. "Don't let the mark touch the station core," she whispered, almost to herself. Luther caught it. "What?" Astra stiffened. "Nothing." "You said that before." Luther stood up. "In the medical bay. You said, Don't let the mark touch the core. And Grace said the signal goes deep. Astra, what is down there? Astra looked at the twins, then at Luther. She seemed to be weighing the cost of silence against the cost of truth. The station isn't just a station, she said finally. Glimmer Spoke is built around a spire that was here when my ancestors arrived 3,000 years ago. We built the station to hide it, to contain it. The vault, Luther said. Yes, Astra nodded. The vault of teeth. Morrow believes it contains the weapons of the gods. He believes if he opens it, the Fenrai will rule the sector. But the legends say it is not a weapon. What is it then? A prison, Astra said. Or a cage? We do not know. But the Fang Crest is the bio-key. If Morrow gets you, he will drag you down there. He will force you to touch the gate. And if he does... Bad things happen, Luther finished. Catastrophic things, Astra said. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The emergency klaxons began to wail a harsh, rising tone that signaled a hull breach. They are here, Astra said, drawing her weapon. Morrow isn't waiting for the vote. The door exploded inward. It wasn't the mob. It was the Black Howl Morrow's personal elite fanatics. They stormed the room, moving with precision. Astra fired. Her plasma bolts took down the first two, but there were too many. Get behind me! Luther yelled to the twins. He felt the surge again, the sweetness, the power. He raised his hand, and the hexagonal shield snapped into existence, blocking a hail of kinetic rounds. But this time, it felt heavier. It drained him faster. We can't stay here, Astra shouted over the noise of the firefight. We are cut off from the hangar bays. Then where do we go? Luther gritted his teeth, feeling the shield buckling under the assault. Astra looked at him. Her eyes were wild. Down, she said. We go down, to the forbidden level. You mean toward the thing that might destroy the universe? Luther asked. It is the only place Morrow cannot track us immediately, Astra said. The radiation in the lower deep scrambles sensors. It is our only chance to hide until I can rally the loyalists. Luther looked at the shield shimmering in front of him. He looked at the twins huddling behind his legs like frightened cubs. He looked at Astra the warrior who was asking the janitor for orders. He hated this. He hated every second of it. Fine, Luther said, dropping the shield and grabbing a heavy metal lampstand as a makeshift club. Let's go to the basement. I know my way around basements. Follow me. Astra kicked open a maintenance hatch in the floor. Luther ushered the twins down the ladder. He took one last look at the comfortable room, the life he was leaving behind. The life of a man who just wanted to pay his rent. He jumped into the dark, the violet light of his chest illuminating the rusted rungs of the ladder, leading them down into the belly of the beast. The descent into the bowels of Glimmer Spoke was not a journey through distance, but through time. The service ladder had ended 3,000 feet above, giving way to a spiraling ramp carved directly into the station's foundational asteroid. The air here was stagnant, heavy, with the scent of ozone, and something muskier, like dried truffles or old parchment. The hum of the station's atmospheric recyclers, usually a comforting white noise, was gone. In its place was a low, subsonic thrum that vibrated in the soles of Luther's boots. Luther wiped sweat from his forehead. The solvent tank was gone, destroyed in the fight above, but he felt heavier than he ever had while working a double shift. The fang crest on his chest was acting like a Geiger counter for the weirdness. Every step deeper into the dark, the violet brand pulsed hotter, sending prickly tendrils of heat across his collarbone. I have cleaned the waste reclamation pipes in Sector 4, Luther whispered, his voice echoing too loudly in the gloom. I thought that was the bottom of the universe. I was wrong. This is the basement's basement. Astra walked ahead of him, her silver armor glowing faintly in the gloom. She did not turn around. Keep moving. If the Black Howl finds the service hatch, we have less than 20 minutes before they are on top of us." "Encouraging," Luther muttered. Dr. Grace, walking beside him with a portable scanner that looked like it belonged in a museum, paused to examine the wall. She adjusted her spectacles, squinting at the rock face. "Luther, look at this," Dr. Grace said. Luther stepped closer. He expected to see jagged asteroid rock, the raw silicate of the celestial body the station was anchored to. Instead, the wall was smooth, dark, and segmented. It curved in rhythmic arches that looked disturbingly biological. "It looks like ribs," Luther said, a shiver running down a spine that had just been surgically repaired. "Not ribs," Grace corrected, tapping the surface. The wall shivered under her touch, a ripple of light traveling through the stone. "Polymers, but not synthetic. This is grown architecture, biomimicry on a scale I have never seen. And look at the readings." She shoved the scanner screen toward him. Luther saw a jagged line spiking red. "Radiation?" he asked. "Emotion," Grace said grimly. "The material is psychoreactive. It is absorbing the ambient cortisol levels from us. It knows we are afraid." "Great," Luther said, pulling his torn jumpsuit collar higher. "The walls are moody. Can we please keep moving before the hallway gets depressed and decides to crush us?" They pushed deeper. The path widened, opening into a vast cavernous space that looked less like a cave and more like the inside of a gargantuan throat. The ribs arched high overhead, disappearing into shadows. Suddenly, Luther grabbed his chest and stumbled. The heat from the crest flared sharp and demanding. "Down!" Astra hissed. She spun around, grabbing Luther by the shoulder and shoving him behind a pillar of calcified bone metal. Alden and Tessa, who had been silent, shadows behind them, dropped into a crouch instantly, their eyes flashing gold in the dark. "What is it?" Alden whispered, his voice cracking. "Are they here?" "No," Astra said, her ears swiveling forward. "But he is losing control," she pointed at Luther. The violet light from his chest was not pulsing rhythmically anymore. It was strobing, casting erratic, jagged shadows against the bone walls. A low, whining sound was emanating from the mark, rising in pitch. "I can't stop it," Luther gasped, clutching his sternum. "It feels like it wants to push." "It senses a threat," Astra said. She knelt in front of him, her face inches from his. "The psychoreactive walls. They are amplifying your fear. The Crest is trying to deploy the barrier to protect you from the environment itself. You must control it." "I don't have an owner's manual," Luther snapped teeth, gritting against the sensation of hot needles in his nerves. "I am a janitor. I know how to mix bleach and ammonia without killing everyone. I don't know how to turn off a magical alien mood ring." "It is not magic," Astra said sharply. "It is intent. Listen to me." She grabbed his wrists, pulling his hands away from his chest. Her grip was iron-strong, but her voice dropped an octave, becoming calm, authoritative. "You created the shield in the medical bay because you wanted to save the twins. You created the shield against the assassin because you wanted to save yourself. The mechanism responds to the imperative of protection. I am trying to protect us." "No," Astra shook her head. "You are panicking. Panic is scattered. Protection is specific. Do not try to push the fear away. Choose something to keep safe. Visualize it. Anchor the energy to a person." Luther looked at her. He looked past her shoulder to where Alden and Tessa were huddled. They looked small. They looked like kids who should be worrying about exams, not assassins. He closed his eyes. He thought of the moment in the corridor, the way Tessa had shaken, the way Alden had tried to stand tall, despite being naked and terrified. He didn't want to be a hero. He just didn't want them to be hurt. Keep them safe, he thought. Just keep the kids safe. The chaotic whining noise stopped. The strobe light flashing smoothed out into a steady, rhythmic pulse. The heat in his chest cooled to a manageable warmth. Luther opened his eyes. A faint hexagonal shimmer was hovering just over his skin, stable and quiet. "Better," Astra said. She didn't let go of his wrists. Specifics. Luther exhaled, his breath shaky. Got it. Focus on the customer, not the mess. This power, Astra said, her eyes searching his face. It is dangerous for a warrior. A warrior wants to win. A warrior has ego. The Crest rejects ego. It feeds on. She hesitated. Sincerity. Well, Luther managed a weak grin. I am sincerely terrified. Does that count? It counts, Astra said. She released his wrists, but for a second, her hand lingered, brushing against the edge of the burn mark, where the jumpsuit was torn. She wasn't wearing her gauntlets. She must have taken them off to check her equipment earlier. Her fingertips were cool, the pads rough like a canine's, but the touch was gentle. Luther froze. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the alien tech. Are you checking the merchandise, Commander? Luther asked, his voice rougher than he intended. It was a deflection, a clumsy joke to hide the sudden awkward intimacy of the moment. Astra pulled her hand back as if burned. She stood up abruptly, turning her back to him. But Luther saw at the slight twitch of her left ear, the way the fur on the back of her neck bristled. In Fenri body language, that was the equivalent of a profound blush. The merchandise is damaged, Astra said stiffly, checking her plasma rifle. We move, Alden snickered. It was a soft sound, but in the acoustic perfection of the tunnel, it was audible. She likes you, the boy whispered as Luther stood up. Shut up, kid, Luther whispered back. She wants to study me in a lab jar. No, Tessa joined in, moving up beside him. If she wanted you in a jar, you would be in a jar. Astra does not touch things she intends to discard. You two are hilarious, Luther grumbled, dusting off his knees. Remind me to charge you extra for the babysitting when this is over. You are not a babysitter, Alden said, his tone turning serious. You are the gatekeeper, even if you dress like a servant. I am a servant, Luther corrected him. And there is dignity in it. A king can rule a kingdom, but if the toilets overflow, the kingdom smells like quiet, Astra commanded. They had reached the end of the tunnel. The space before them opened up into a rotunda, so vast the ceiling was lost in darkness. But the floor was visible, illuminated by the same violet phosphorescence that powered Luther's chest. Standing in the center of the chamber were 12 monoliths. They were massive slabs of the white bone stone, curving upward like the teeth of a giant predator, emerging from the ground. They were arranged in a circle, and the space between them hummed. It was a physical sound. It vibrated against Luther's teeth. The echo chamber, Astra whispered. Her voice was filled with a mix of awe and dread. The songs say the ancestors screamed their sins into the stone so the future would not have to carry them. Dr. Grace walked toward the nearest slab. She raised her scanner, but then lowered it. She didn't need the machine. She pressed her ear against the cold stone. Not sins, Dr. Grace said softly. Data, audio logs. These are storage drives, hard light crystalline storage. Can we play them? Tessa asked, stepping forward. I wouldn't, Luther said. My chest is buzzing again. It feels like a handshake waiting to happen. We do not have time for archaeology, Astra said, scanning the perimeter. This is the antechamber to the vault. The entrance must be right behind you, a voice boomed. It didn't come from the shadows. It came from everywhere, amplified by the acoustics of the chamber. From the dark gaps between the giant teeth slabs, figures emerged. They wore the matte black armor of the Black Howl, their faces hidden behind the snarling bone masks. There were 20 of them. And in the center, walking calmly, as if he were strolling through a garden, was Prelate Morrow. He did not look like a monster. That was the worst part. He looked like a grandfather. His fur was white, groomed to perfection. His robes were modest. Only his eyes, yellow and burning with a fanaticism that could ignite atmospheres, betrayed him. You have brought the key to the lock, Morrow said, spreading his arms. I should thank you, Janitor. You saved us the trouble of dragging you down the stairs. Astra moved instantly, placing herself between Morrow and the twins. "Stand down, Morrow. This is a holy site. Bloodshed here is a curse upon your lineage." "Tradition," Morrow scoffed, waving a hand. "The crutch of the weak. We are not here to worship the past, Commander. We are here to weaponize it." He turned his gaze to Luther. "Luther," Morrow said. He spoke the name like he was tasting a fine wine. "Look at you, a human, a sweeper of filth, standing in the throat of a god." "I prefer sanitation specialist," Luther said, his voice steady, despite the trembling in his legs. "And this god needs a dentist. Too much plaque buildup," Morrow chuckled. "Humor. The shield of the insecure. I know you, Luther. I have read your file. 42 years old, divorced, no children, 3 bankruptcy filings. You live in a HAB unit smaller than my wardrobe. You walk through life with your head down, hoping no one notices you." Luther felt the words hit him like physical blows. They were true, every single one of them. "You are nothing," Morrow continued, his voice soft, seductive. "The universe is a machine and you are the grease they wipe off the gears. But it doesn't have to be that way." Morrow took a step closer. The Black Howl warriors raised their weapons, but they did not fire. "Open the vault," Morrow said. "Join us. The Fang Crest chose you, yes. But you can choose how to use it. Give me the vault and I will give you a place at the table. No more cleaning up other people's messes. You will be the one making the mess. You will be a king of the New Order." Luther looked at Morrow. He looked at the promise of power in the prelate's eyes. For a second, just one heartbeat, Luther wanted it. He was tired. He was so incredibly tired of being the guy who apologized for existing. He was tired of the invisible life. To be a king, to be feared, to matter. The violet light on his chest dimmed. The shield flickered. The temptation was a poison that weakened the sincerity of his protection. "He is right," Luther whispered. "I am nobody." "Luther," Astra's voice cut through the fog. It wasn't an order. It was quiet. "Look at me." Luther turned his head. Astra wasn't looking at the enemy. She was looking at him. "You are not nobody," Astra said. "I have watched you. You shield children you do not know. You mock tyrants to their faces to hide your fear. You carry a burden that would crush a king like Morrow in seconds." She stepped closer, ignoring the leveled guns of the enemy. "You think you are invisible because you do not seek to rule," Astra said, fierce and low. "But that is why the crest glows for you. You are the only one here who is not trying to steal the light. You are the only one worthy of holding it." Luther felt something click in his chest. The shame didn't vanish, but it stopped paralyzing him. He looked at Astra's blue eyes, and he saw himself reflected there, not as a janitor, but as a man standing his ground. He turned back to Morrow. "You know," Luther said, his voice gaining strength, "I've cleaned up after kings like you before. You always leave the worst stains. You think you're important because you break things. But fixing things, holding things together, that's the real work." Morrow's face hardened. The grandfatherly mask slipped, revealing the wolf beneath. "Then die with your mop, human," Morrow snarled. "Kill them all. Spare the chest piece." The chamber exploded into chaos. "Shields!" Astra screamed, shoving the twins toward Luther. The Black Howl opened fire. Kinetic rounds and plasma bolts filled the air like a swarm of angry hornets. Luther didn't think. He didn't weigh his options. He just felt the presence of Alden and Tessa behind him. He felt Astra firing her rifle to his left. He felt Grace cowering behind a tooth slab. Protect them. He screamed the thought into his own blood. The Fang Crest didn't just glow. It roared. A wall of violet light erupted from Luther's chest, expanding outward in a perfect dome. It wasn't just a barrier. It was a fortress. The bullets hit the hexagon field and vaporized. The plasma splashed against it like water on hot glass. "Hold the line," Astra shouted, firing through the semi-permeable membrane of the shield, a feature Luther hadn't even known existed. Her shots took down 2 Black Howl warriors. The sound in the chamber changed. The hum of the tooth slabs rose to a deafening crescendo. They were resonating with Luther's heartbeat. Thump, thump. The floor shook. Thump, thump. The giant stone teeth began to glow with the same violet light. Morrow looked around, his eyes wide. What is he doing? He is not trained. He cannot synchronize with the architecture. Luther wasn't trying to synchronize. He was just trying to stay alive. But as the adrenaline flooded his system, the connection to the crest deepened. He felt his mind stretching out, not just creating a shield but touching the room itself. And then he heard it. It wasn't a sound in his ears. It was a voice inside his skull. Signal received. Luther froze. The shield wavered, waiting for handshake pattern recognition. Human. Genetic markers. Earth origin. The voice was mechanical, ancient, yet strangely soft. It didn't sound like a Fenrai god. It didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like a recorded announcement at a spaceport. Suddenly, Luther wasn't in the cave anymore. For a split second, his mind was pulled into a vision. He saw blue. Not the violet of the alien tech, but the deep, churning blue of an ocean. He smelled salt. He felt rain-cold, heavy rain falling on soil. He saw a skyline of steel and glass rising from a green coast. It was Earth, but it was an Earth from 10,000 years ago. Luther, Astra's scream pulled him back. A Black Howl warrior had breached the perimeter of the shield, while Luther was distracted. The assassin lunged, a vibroblade aimed at Tessa. Luther didn't use the shield. He didn't use a weapon. He moved. He threw his body across the gap, tackling the assassin. They hit the ground hard. The vibroblade skidded across the stone floor. Luther head-butted the assassin, a move he had learned in a bar fight on Mars, cracking the bone mask. The warrior went limp. Luther scrambled up, panting. I'm okay, just mild concussion." The vision had faded, but the feeling remained. The vault knew him, not as a gatekeeper, but as a human. Morrow saw the glowing teeth. He saw the way the chamber was responding to Luther. Realization dawned on him, not of failure, but of opportunity. "Back," Morrow ordered his troops. "Pull back." The Black Howl retreated into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. It wasn't a surrender. It was a tactical withdrawal. Morrow had seen what he needed to see. The key worked. Silence returned to the echo chamber, broken only by the heavy breathing of the group. "Why did they stop?" Alden asked, trembling. "Because they got what they wanted," Dr. Grace said. She was staring at her scanner, her face pale. "Luther, look at the data stream." She held up the device. "When you shielded us," Grace said, her voice shaking, "you didn't just block the bullets. You sent a ping, a query." "I didn't send anything," Luther said, rubbing his head. "I just wanted them to stop shooting." "The vault answered," Grace said. She looked up at the massive dark doorway beyond the tooth slabs. "This isn't a weapon silo, Luther. It isn't a temple." "What is it?" Astra asked, holstering her weapon. "It is a router," Grace whispered. "A communications hub. An interstellar transceiver capable of instantaneous transmission across galaxies." "A phone," Luther blinked. "We almost died for a giant telephone." "Not just a phone." Grace continued, turning to look at the fang crest on Luther's chest. "This facility connects to a network that has been dormant for eons. A network that spans thousands of star systems." She pointed a shaking finger at Luther. "And the crest isn't a key to open a door. It is a user login. It is an admin privilege." Luther looked down at his chest. The violet light was pulsing slowly now, like a computer in sleep mode. "Someone built this," Grace said. "Someone built this underneath the Fenrai homeworlds before the Fenrai even evolved. And the biometric lock accepts human DNA." Astra stared at Luther. The implication hung in the air, heavier than the stone slabs. "Humans are new to the galactic stage," Astra said slowly. We met you only 200 years ago. How can an ancient machine recognize you? I don't know, Luther said. He remembered the smell of the rain, the vision of the ocean. But I think humanity has been here before. Or, he looked at the dark maw of the vault. Or we were never from Earth to begin with. The hum of the vault deepened, as if in agreement. A cold wind blew from the darkness, carrying no scent of rot, but the crisp, clean smell of a storm that had been waiting 10,000 years to break. The Grand Council chamber of the Fenri Coalition was designed to intimidate. It was a vast circular amphitheater, hewn from black basalt, lit by floating orbs that cast long, predatory shadows. The acoustics were perfect, designed to carry a whisper from the center pit to the highest tiers, where the clan elders sat in judgment. Luther stood in the center pit. He was still wearing his gray maintenance jumpsuit now, torn at the shoulder and stained with dried blood and chemical sealant. He looked like a smudge of graphite on a pristine diamond. Oren stood beside him, looking more exhausted than Luther had ever seen a diplomat look. "They do not want to hear from me," Luther whispered to Astra, who stood a few feet behind him, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial dagger. "They want to dissect me." "They are frightened," Astra replied, her voice low and tight. "Frightened animals bite. If you remain silent, Luther, you are just prey. Improvise. Speak. Silence allows others to write your story for you." Luther looked up. Hundreds of golden eyes stared down at him. The air smelled of ozone and musk, the scent of aggression. High Counselor Varric of Fenri, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the light, leaned forward. "Oren of the Silver Pact claims this human is the bearer of the gatekeeper's burden. We see only a scavenger who has stolen a relic." "I didn't steal it," Luther said. His voice was not booming. It was the flat, tired voice of a man who had explained safety protocols to rookie cleaners for 20 years. "And, frankly, the return policy is terrible." A ripple of growls moved through the chamber. "You mock the sacred," Varric roared. "I don't mock," Luther interrupted, stepping forward. He felt the fang crest on his chest warm up, responding to the ambient hostility. He willed it to stay dark. "I just observe. I have worked on Glimmer Spoke for 10 years. I have cleaned the vents where your sacred debates end up as hot air. I have scrubbed the floors where you sign treaties and then spill wine or blood." The room went dead silent. A human janitor, speaking out of turn, was unprecedented. "I don't know your laws," Luther continued, looking toward the section where he knew Morrow's faction was seated. "I don't know your prophecies about teeth and vaults. But I know this. I saw 2 kids naked, terrified and shaking, being hunted down like rats in a maze you built for them. You call that tradition? I call that a mess." He pointed a finger at the High Counselor. "You want to fight over power, fine. Fight each other. But don't use children as an excuse to kill. That's not noble. That's just lazy." The silence that followed was heavy physical. It was the silence of a room realizing that the smallest person in it had just slapped them all in the face with the truth. Then the screens high on the walls flickered. The silence broke not with applause, but with a transmission override. The face of Prelate Morrow appeared distorted by static, looming over the council. "He speaks with the tongue of a deceiver," Morrow's voice boomed, drowning out the counselors. "See how the human twists our shame. He claims moral high ground while his species infects our station. The crest was not given. It was grafted a parasite, mimicking a god." On the screen footage played doctored footage. It showed Luther in the medical bay, not lying in pain, but surrounded by human machines that seemed to be carving the crest into his flesh. It was a crude fabrication, but to a populace already on the edge of panic, it was a spark in a fuel depot. "The Black Howl demands justice," Morrow screamed. "Purge the parasite, reclaim the key." Outside the heavy doors of the chamber, a dull roar began. It sounded like the ocean, But Luther knew better. It was the sound of a mob. Astra's comlink chirped. She tapped her ear, her expression freezing. "Commander Astra!" A voice barked loud enough for Luther to hear. It was the High General. "The situation is critical. The mob is breaching the outer perimeter. Secure the asset. Neutralize the human. Cut the arm off to save the body." Luther looked at Astra. Neutralize. That was a polite military word for a bullet to the back of the head. Astra looked at the general's holographic projection on her wrist. She looked at the mob forming on the screens. Then she looked at Luther, who was standing there, looking less like a holy vessel, and more like a man wondering if he had time to quit his job before he died. "Commander," the general barked. "Acknowledge." Astra reached up and crushed her comm bead between two armored fingers. It sparked and died. "Order unacknowledged due to static," she said calmly. She grabbed Luther's arm. "Run!" They didn't go back to the safe house. The riots had spread too fast. The corridors of Glimmer Spoke were chaos alarms, wailing smoke filling the air, and gangs of Fenrir wearing black howl masks tearing through the mercantile sectors. Astra led Luther Alden and Tessa into the labyrinth of the thermal exhaust tunnels. It was a part of the station few knew existed, a narrow, sweltering network of pipes and fans that kept the station from overheating. They stopped in a small maintenance junction to catch their breath. The air here was thick and metallic. Alden was shaking. Tessa was gripping the hem of Luther's torn jumpsuit so hard her knuckles were white. "Why do they hate us?" Alden asked, his voice small. "We are the heirs." "They don't hate you," Luther said, sliding down the wall to sit on the grate floor. "They are scared. Morrow told them a scary story, and people will do terrible things to make the scary story go away." Astra was checking her weapon, her back to them. Her posture was rigid. She had just thrown away her career, her rank, and likely her life for a janitor and 2 teenagers. "You disobeyed a direct order," Luther said softly. Astra didn't turn. "The order was stupid." "It was lawful," Luther said. "You're the commander of the Vanguard. Law is your religion." Astra finally turned. She took off her helmet, letting it clang onto the grate. Her fur was matted with sweat, and her eyes were fierce. "My religion is the protection of the pack," she hissed. "The general wanted to sacrifice you to appease a mob. That is not protection. That is politics. I hate politics." She sat down opposite him, her long legs cramping in the small space. They were close knees, almost touching. The red emergency light bathed them in a crimson glow. "You risked everything," Luther said. "Why?" Astra looked at him, really looked at him, stripping away the layers of species and rank. "In my culture," she said quietly, "we do not have a word for love the way humans do." "You throw that word around. You love pizza. You love your dog. You love a song." "I do love pizza," Luther admitted weakly. "We say Kalrun," Astra said. "It translates roughly to holding breath. When you are underwater or in vacuum or in the smoke of battle, you share your air supply. You breathe only when the other breathes. You hold your breath so the other can live." She pointed a clawed finger at his chest. "You held your breath for these children in the corridor. You held your breath for me in the vault. You are—" she struggled with the words. "You are worth the air." Luther felt the heat rise in his face, hotter than the exhaust pipes. He looked at his hands, calloused, scarred, stained hands. "I think my breath smells like industrial floor polish and cheap coffee," Luther said, a nervous chuckle escaping him. "Not exactly poetic." Astra stared at him for a second. Then her ears twitched, her mouth curled, and she laughed. It was a rusty sound like a bark that turned into a melody. It transformed her face, softening the predator into something beautiful. "It smells like solvent," she agreed, smiling. "But I find I do not mind the smell." The moment hung there, fragile and perfect. Luther wanted to reach out. He wanted to tell her that she was the first person in 10 years who had looked at him and seen a man, not a function. Then the static of a different frequency cut through the air. "Luther Astra, can you hear me?" It was Dr. Grace. The signal was weak, bouncing off the thermal shielding. Luther tapped his earpiece. "Doctor, we're in the vents. We're alive." "Listen to me." Dr. Grace's voice was urgent, breathless. "I've been analyzing the data from the echo chamber. The synchronization, it's accelerating. The Fang Crest isn't just a key, Luther. It's a remote interface." "Interface for what?" "For the station's gravity drive. For life support. For everything," Grace said. "But that's not the bad news. I found a bypass code in the system. Someone else is logging in. Someone is using a secondary key." "There is no secondary key," Astra said sharply. "There is only one gatekeeper." "There is a bioduplicate," Grace said. "Genetic resonance. It's weaker, but if forced, it can trick the system." Luther looked at the twins, Alden and Tessa. "Genetic resonance," Luther whispered. "The heirs." The maintenance hatch above them exploded. It wasn't a random search party. It was a precision strike. 2 flashbang grenades dropped into the cramped junction. Bang. White light blinded them. The sound shattered Luther's equilibrium. He fell back, his ears ringing. "Secure the spare!" a voice roared. Luther flailed blindly, his hand finding Tessa's arm. He pulled her down, shielding her with his body, expecting the blades. But the blades didn't come for him. "Luther!" Alden screamed. Luther blinked the spots from his vision, just in time to see a grappling cable wrap around Alden's waist. The boy was yanked upward through the shattered hatch with terrifying speed. Astra launched herself upward, her claws scrabbling against the metal, but a heavy blast door slammed shut, sealing the hatch. "Alden!" Tessa shrieked, pounding on the metal. "No, no, no!" Luther scrambled up, his hands shaking. "Dr. Grace! They took the boy! They took Alden!" "Morrow!" Astra snarled, slamming her fist into the wall, denting the steel. "He knows he cannot force you to open the vault. So he will use the boy. He will force the system to accept Alden's blood as a proxy." "Where?" Luther demanded. "Where is he taking him?" "There is a shortcut to the core," Astra said, grabbing her helmet. "The reactor coolant shafts. It is suicide to go that way without suits." "Morrow doesn't care about suicide," Luther said, his voice hardening. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. "He cares about winning." He looked at Tessa, who was sobbing silently. He knelt and grabbed her shoulders. "I am going to get your brother back," Luther said. "I promise." Tessa looked at him. "How you are just—" "I'm the janitor." Luther stood up. The Fang Crest on his chest flared, casting a harsh violet light that cut through the red gloom. "And I have the master key." The reactor coolant shaft was a vertical drop of 2 miles, lined with spinning turbines and radiation shielding. Luther, Astra, and Tessa moved down the maintenance catwalks. They didn't sneak. They ran. Luther's chest was burning. The closer they got to the core, the more the Crest reacted. But it wasn't the smooth, rhythmic pulse of the echo chamber. It was erratic, spasming. Every time Luther thought about Alden, about the boy being hurt because of him, the violet light flickered and died, then surged back painfully. "You are drifting!" Astra yelled over the roar of the turbines. "Control the shield!" They rounded a corner and ran straight into a blockade. 10 Black Howl warriors stood on the gantry, blocking the path to the core door. Fire, bullets, and plasma rained down. Luther threw up his hand. "Protect." The hexagonal shield snapped into existence, but it was thin, brittle. A heavy kinetic round slammed into it, and the shield shattered like glass. Luther was thrown backward, skidding across the grate. A plasma bolt grazed his arm, singing the flesh. "Luther!" Astra slid in front of him, firing her rifle, taking down 2 attackers. "Focus! What is wrong with you?" "I can't," Luther screamed, clutching his chest. "It's my fault he was taken because I wasn't fast enough. I'm not a guardian. I'm a liability." The shield flickered into existence for a second, then vanished again. The Crest was feeding on his emotion, and his emotion was self-loathing. The system rejected it. Astra dragged him behind a turbine housing. Bullets sparked off the metal above their heads. She grabbed him by the collar of his jumpsuit and slammed him against the machinery. "Stop it!" she shouted, her face inches from his. "Stop pitying yourself." "I am getting people killed," Luther yelled back, tears of frustration in his eyes. "I am just a guy who mops floors. I can't save the galaxy." "You are right," Astra said. "You cannot save the galaxy. You are too small for that," she shook him. "But you can save the boy. And you can save me." "Is that not enough?" Luther stared at her. "You take pain for others so well," Astra said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper, her eyes searching his. "You let blades cut you. You let the council mock you. You carry the weight of the world because you think you deserve the pain. But you suck at letting others love you. You think you aren't worth the protection you give." The words hit Luther harder than the plasma bolt. "You are not a liability," Astra said, her hand resting over the burning brand on his chest. "You are my partner. Breathe, Luther. Hold the breath." Luther took a shuddering breath. He looked at Tessa, who was crouched beside them, holding a small pipe as a weapon, looking terrified but ready to fight. He looked at Astra, who was looking at him, not with expectation, but with belief. He didn't need to be a hero. He just needed to be there. The self-loathing receded, replaced by a warm, steady clarity. The Fang Crest hummed, a pure, deep note. Luther stood up. He walked out from behind the turbine. The Black Howl warriors opened fire. Luther didn't raise his hand. He just walked. The violet light exploded from him not as a shield, but as a wave. It rolled forward, solid and unstoppable. The bullet stopped in midair and dropped. The warriors were pushed back, sliding across the gantry, as if hit by a wall of wind. "Stay behind me," Luther said calmly. He walked through the gunfire, the shield wrapping around Astra and Tessa like a second skin. He reached the heavy blast door of the core. He didn't look for a keypad. He placed his hand on the metal. "Open," he said. The door didn't just open. It dissolved. The nanites in the metal obeyed the command of the admin, unspooling and parting like a curtain of silver dust. The core of Glimmer Spoke was not a machine room. It was a cathedral of biology and light. The walls were lined with the same bone stone, but here it was alive. Veins of golden fluid pumped through the rock. The floor was transparent, looking down into a swirling vortex of energy that looked suspiciously like a contained singularity. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, stood Prelate Morrow. He held Alden by the neck. The boy was limp, unconscious, but alive. Morrow had forced Alden's hand onto a pedestal that glowed with an angry red light. "You are late, Janitor," Morrow said. He didn't shout. The acoustics of the room carried his voice into Luther's brain. "Let him go, Morrow," Luther said, stepping onto the platform. Astra and Tessa fanned out weapons trained on the prelate. "Look at this," Morrow said, gesturing to the vortex below. "The source. The Fenrai ancestors found it, built a cage around it, and forgot it. They became weak. They joined the coalition. They started trading with monkeys." He spat the word at Luther. "You want to open the cage?" Luther asked. "Dr. Gray says this station holds the system together. You open this, you destroy the station. You kill everyone." "I kill the weakness," Morrow corrected. "The vault will release the energy. It will wipe the slate clean. Only the strong, those with the blood to survive the shift, will remain. We will rebuild. We will have our teeth again." He wasn't insane, Luther realized. He was desperate. He was a man watching his culture change, and terrified that change meant death. He was trying to freeze time by burning the clock. "It doesn't work that way," Luther said, walking closer. The crest on his chest was pulsing in time with the station's heartbeat. You can't burn the house down just because you don't like the new furniture. You have the power, Luther, Morrow said. I can feel it. The station listens to you. Join me. We can direct the energy. We can spare your friends. We can rule this sector. No more cleaning. No more bowing. You can be the emperor of the new age. Luther looked at the pedestal. He could feel the connection. It was true. With a thought, he could override Morrow. He could crush the prelate. He could turn off the gravity in the room and float. He could be a god. It was tempting. For a man who had spent his life looking at the floor, the view from the top was dizzying. Then he looked at Alden hanging limp in Morrow's grip. He looked at Tessa's tear-streaked face. He looked at Astra. Astra wasn't looking at Morrow. She was looking at Luther, waiting, trusting. I don't want to be an emperor, Luther said. The hours are terrible. And the uniform is ridiculous. He raised his hand. I choose the mop. Luther slammed his palm against his own chest, driving the heel of his hand into the fang crest. He didn't push energy out. He pulled it in. He grabbed the signal Morrow was forcing through Alden and yanked it. No, Morrow screamed. The red light on the pedestal died. The violet light on Luther's chest flared white-hot. The feedback loop hit Morrow like a physical blow. The prelate was thrown backward, releasing Alden. Tessa now! Astra shouted. Tessa darted forward, sliding under the energy discharge, and grabbed her brother, dragging him away from the edge of the vortex. You fool! Morrow shrieked, scrambling to his feet. You have broken the seal without directing the flow. It will spill. The floor beneath them cracked. The vortex didn't explode. It expanded. A beam of pure, blinding white light shot up from the singularity, piercing the ceiling, piercing the station, shooting out into the void. But it wasn't just light. Luther fell to his knees, clutching his head. It was memory. It hit everyone in the room. It hit everyone on the station. It hit everyone in the fleet outside. A storm of images. Luther saw a sky with 3 suns. He saw a fleet of ships that looked like grown crystal. He saw a woman human, holding hands with a Fenrir giant, standing before this very vault. He heard a voice. Not the mechanical voice from before. A living voice. Project Harmony initiated. DNA synthesis complete. The seeds are sown. The vault wasn't a weapon. It wasn't just a router. It was a nursery. Morrow screamed as the memories overwhelmed him, his narrow view of history shattered by the truth that flooded his mind. He clawed at his eyes, backing away, until he stepped too far. He fell from the platform, disappearing into the white light of the memory stream. The light intensified. Luther felt himself being lifted, not by gravity, but by the sheer pressure of the data. He reached out. Astra! She lunged, grabbing his hand. Her grip was iron. I have you! She yelled, her voice barely audible over the roar of history waking up. I have you, Luther! The core cracked open, and from the light, something massive began to rise. It wasn't a weapon. It was a shape. A silhouette against the blinding white. It looked like a ship, but it also looked like a hand reaching out. Luther looked at Astra as the world turned white. I think, Luther shouted, we just woke up the landlords. The vault did not look like a room. It looked like the inside of a lung that was taking its first breath in 10,000 years. The blinding white light that had swallowed the core finally began to recede, settling into a rhythmic bioluminescent pulse that traveled along the vast curved walls. The architecture here was dizzying spirals of bone-white metal that defied gravity, twisting upward into a ceiling that looked less like stone and more like a frozen nebula. But it was the sound that brought Luther to his knees. It was a low, resonant thrum, a vibration that bypassed the ears and went straight to the marrow. And within that thrum, there were voices. Not spoken words, but impressions. Memories. Luther squeezed his eyes shut. He expected to hear the roar of alien wars, or the wisdom of the Fenrir ancients. Instead, he heard rain. He heard the distinct metallic pinging of heavy rain hitting a corrugated tin roof. He smelled wet asphalt and ozone. He felt the phantom sensation of a cold beer bottle in his hand and the ache of a back tired from a double shift. It was a memory of Earth, or perhaps a colony world modeled after it, a memory from a childhood he had thought he had scrubbed away years ago to make room for survival. "Do you hear it?" The voice was ragged. Luther opened his eyes. Prelate Morrow was standing near the edge of the platform, his arms raised toward the pulsing ceiling. The prelate was weeping. But they were not tears of joy. They were tears of confusion. "I hear the hunt," Morrow whispered, his voice trembling. "I hear the tearing of flesh, the taste of blood on snow, the first pack." He turned to look at Luther, his yellow eyes wide and manic. "What do you hear, Janitor? Do you hear the glory?" Luther stood up slowly. His chest felt cold, an unnatural, absolute zero cold that radiated from the fang crest. "I hear a tin roof," Luther said, "and I hear a leak I need to fix." "A leak," Morrow spat the word. "You stand in the cathedral of the architects and you think of plumbing, you are unworthy." Morrow turned back to the abyss in the center of the room. The singularity was no longer swirling. It was solidifying into a column of pure data. "I will correct the mistake," Morrow shrieked. "I will rewrite the song." He slammed his staff onto the activation plinth. He didn't have the biometric access, but he had brute force and a series of illegal bypass algorithms running through his rig. The vault shuddered. The gentle pulse turned into a violent spasm. "Stop him!" Dr. Grace shouted from the entryway. She was holding her scanner like a shield. "He is forcing a phase shift. The energy isn't stabilizing. It is rebounding." A lash of white energy thick as a tree trunk whipped out from the column. It wasn't aimed at anyone. It was wild, a thrashing limb of a waking giant. It swung directly toward Luther. Luther raised his hand, his mind screaming, "Protect," but the crest was cold. It was rebooting. The shield didn't form. A silver blur slammed into him. Luther hit the ground hard, skidding across the smooth floor. He looked up, expecting to see the ceiling. Instead, he saw Astra. She was lying on top of him, her armor smoking. The lash of energy had struck her backplate. The ceramic alloy designed to withstand plasma fire was cracked wide open. Beneath it, fur and flesh were seared. "Astra!" Luther scrambled out from under her panic, seizing his throat. She coughed a wet, rattling sound. Blood, dark red, oxygen-rich Fenryi blood, leaked from the corner of her mouth. "Do not panic," she wheezed, her eyes, trying to focus on his face. "It is undignified." "Undignified? You just used your spine as a lightning rod." Luther's hands hovered over her, terrified to touch, terrified not to. "Grace, Dr. Grace." Grace was already running, sliding onto her knees beside them. She jammed a hypospray into Astra's neck. "The armor took the thermal shock," Grace said rapidly, her hands moving with practiced speed. "But the kinetic impact broken ribs, internal hemorrhaging. She needs a tank, Luther. She needs it now." "We can't leave." Astra grabbed Luther's wrist. Her grip was weak, shaking. "Look." Luther looked up. The column of energy was destabilizing. Arcs of lightning were striking the walls, shattering the ancient stone. The twins, Alden and Tessa, were huddled behind a pillar screaming as the floor beneath them began to vibrate into dust. "The system is rejecting Morrow," Astra whispered. "It needs the anchor." "Me," Luther said. The cold in his chest was spreading, numbing his arms. "You have to hold the breath for me now," Astra said, a faint, pained smile touching her lips. "I am out of air." Luther looked at her. He looked at the woman who had called him a warrior when he felt like a coward. The woman who had laughed at his jokes about floor polish. "I've got you," Luther said, his voice cracking. "I'm holding it." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was desperate, salty, with sweat and blood, a promise stamped in the middle of a disaster. Then he stood up and turned to the machine. Morrow was screaming now. not in anger, but in terror. The console was shocking him repeatedly, but his fanaticism wouldn't let him let go. Luther walked onto the central dais. The air pressure was immense. It felt like walking into a hurricane. "Get away from it!" Morrow shrieked. "It is mine!" "It was never yours," Luther said. He didn't shout. The acoustics carried his voice effortlessly. "And it isn't mine either." Luther stepped up to the main interface, a surface of smooth black glass. He didn't need a code. He didn't need a staff. He placed his palm flat against the glass. The fang crest on his chest flared. The violet light turned blinding white. Logan accepted. The voice wasn't outside him anymore. It was inside his nervous system. Luther gasped as his mind was yanked out of his body. He wasn't on the station. He was floating in a stream of data that stretched back 10,000 years. He saw images flashing by at the speed of thought. He saw the Fenrai ancestors, wild feral, tearing each other apart in a planetary civil war. He saw ships arriving. Not Fenrai ships. Human ships. Ancient, blocky utilitarian vessels. Subject Fenrai. Status, self-destructive. Potential high. Intervention required. The voice of the architects. Luther watched as the ancient humans built the vaults. Not as weapons. Not as temples. But as stabilizers. They built a planetary dampening field to calm the hyper-aggressive adrenal glands of the evolving Fenrai, to give them a chance to build a civilization before they killed themselves. Locking mechanism installed. The fang crest, Luther, watched the design of the mark on his chest. Parameters for key carrier. High empathy, low aggression. Protective instinct, overriding survival instinct. Species compatibility, human. The truth hit Luther with the force of a physical blow. The fang crest wasn't a medal. It wasn't a royal signet. It was a leash. It was a control collar designed by ancient humans to ensure that if the Fenrai ever tried to access the raw power of the core, they would need a human, specifically, a human who cared more about others than himself, to turn the key. It was a failsafe against tyranny. And then the second realization followed, darker and colder. The data stream shifted to recent logs. 2 weeks ago. Access request Orin of Silver Pact. Request denied. Biometric mismatch simulation. Running probability of human intervention. Target profile, search found Luther. Occupation sanitation. Psychological profile, chronic altruism, low self-worth, high protective reflex. Manipulation of variable, Route 42. Maintenance schedule altered. Security detail delay authorized. Luther felt his stomach drop. It wasn't fate. It wasn't luck. It wasn't even Morrow. It was the Fenrai High Council. Maybe even Orin. Someone high up knew exactly what the vault required. They knew a Fenrai couldn't open it without burning out. They needed a human sacrifice. They needed a patsy. They had routed the unfurred walk through the Sector 4 market because they knew Luther was rostered to clean there. They knew he would step in. They had engineered his heroism. "I'm a lab rat," Luther whispered in the void. "I'm just a fuse they installed to keep the lights on." The connection snapped back to reality. Luther was standing at the console shaking. Morrow was staring at him, waiting for the power to flow. "Give it to me," Morrow demanded. "Give me the weapon." "There is no weapon, you old fool," Luther said, his voice hollow. "It's a pacifier, a baby monitor. My ancestors built it to stop your ancestors from eating each other until you learn to talk." Morrow froze. Lies. Heresy. "Look at the data," Luther waved his hand, and the room filled with holographic projections of the ancient logs. The undeniable truth of the human ships descending the Fenrai, bowing not to gods, but to scientists in lab coats. "We are not gods," Morrow whispered, watching the hologram of a primitive Fenrai being vaccinated by a human. "We are projects." The realization shattered him. The foundation of his entire belief system, his supremacy, his teeth, it was all a charity case from the species he despised. No, Morrow roared. I deny it. If the past is a lie, I will burn it. He lunged for the manual, override a red lever that pulsed with warning lights. Morrow, don't! Luther shouted. That's the containment flush. Morrow didn't listen. He pulled the lever. The vault groaned. The gravity in the room inverted for a split second. The floor beneath Morrow dissolved into a cloud of nanites. The void he had worshipped wasn't a spiritual realm. It was the waste disposal intake for the core's excess energy. Morrow looked at Luther one last time. There was no anger left in his face, only the terrifying emptiness of a man who realizes he is the punchline of a joke he didn't understand. He fell silently into the dark. The room began to shake violently. The white light turned angry red. Containment breach. System instability at 90%. Emergency purge imminent. Luther, Dr. Grace screamed. The station can't take a purge. It will disintegrate the structural integrity. Glimmer spoke will fall apart. Luther looked at the console. A single prompt was blinking in front of him. Authorized system. Lockdown warning. Neural sync in progress. Hard reset required. Note removal of admin privileges will result in synaptic data loss. Luther understood the warning instantly. He wasn't a scientist, but he knew machines. A hard reset wiped the RAM. The Crest was fused to his nervous system. It was threaded into his memories, his personality, his self. To lock the vault, to shut this door forever, he had to burn the key. And since he was the key, he looked back at Astra. She was conscious barely. She was watching him. She saw him looking at the warning. She saw the resignation in his shoulders. Luther, no, she whispered. The sound carried to him. Do not do it. It's the only way to close the door, Luther said. Then let it stay open, Astra cried out, trying to push herself up. We will find another way. Do not wipe yourself away. I want you to live. I will live, Luther said. Just maybe not all of me. I want you to be you, Astra screamed, tears mixing with the blood on her face. I want the man who cleans floors and makes bad jokes. I do not want a husk, Luther smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was real. I'm a janitor, Astra, he said softly. When the mess is this big, you have to use the strong bleach. You have to scrub until it's gone. He looked at Alden and Tessa. They were safe. He looked at Grace, who was weeping silently. He looked at Astra one last time. He memorized her face, the scar on her eye, the silver of her fur, the way she looked at him like he was a king. I'll see you around, Commander, Luther whispered. He placed both hands on the console. He closed his eyes. He didn't think about saving the galaxy. He didn't think about being a hero. He thought about the rain on the tin roof. He thought about the smell of solvent. He thought about Astra's laugh, that bark-like beautiful melody. Confirm lockdown, confirm, Luther said. He pushed his will into the machine. Zap. It wasn't pain. It was silence. The violet light on his chest flared one last time, blindingly bright, and then imploded. The red warning lights turned green. The roaring of the vault ceased instantly. The shaking stopped. The walls of the core solidified, turning back into cold, dead stone. The Crest turned black. Luther stood there for a second, swaying. He looked at his hands. He looked at the room. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Beep, 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 the smell of antiseptic. The hum of an air recycler. Luther opened his eyes. The ceiling was white. Standard Federation medical paneling. He blinked, trying to clear the fog in his head. His brain felt scrubbed. Like a whiteboard that had been wiped clean, leaving only faint smudges of what used to be written there. He tried to sit up. His chest ached. He looked down. He was wearing a hospital gown. On his chest, peering out from the fabric, was a scar. It was massive, shaped like a stylized jaw, but the skin was pale and knotted. It looked like a burn from a chemical spill. Easy, a voice said. Luther looked to his left. Standing around his bed were 6 figures. They were huge, wolf-like aliens in silver armor. They stood with a rigidity that suggested extreme discipline. One of them, a female with a scar over her eye, stepped forward. She wasn't wearing her helmet. She looked familiar, but also terrifying. "Where am I?" Luther asked. His voice rasped. "Did I miss my shift?" The female warrior stopped. Her ears flattened slightly. She looked at the other guards, then back at him. Her eyes were incredibly blue, and they looked wet. "You are in the Glimmer Spoke medical ward," she said softly. "You have been in a coma for 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Luther panicked. "My supervisor is going to kill me. I have credits to pay. I need to—" He tried to swing his legs out of bed. The female warrior gently pushed him back by the shoulder. Her hand was cool. "Your debts are paid," she said. "Indefinitely," Luther frowned. "Who paid them? Did I win the lottery?" "Something like that," she said. Luther looked at the scar on his chest again. He touched it. "I had an accident chemical burn." "Yes," the warrior said. Her voice was tight, like she was holding back a scream. "A very large chemical burn. You were cleaning up a mess." "Sounds like me," Luther sighed, relaxing back into the pillow. "Always the mess." He looked at her again. She was staring at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, yet safe. "Do I know you?" Luther asked. "I feel like I should know your name." The warrior took a deep breath. A single tear escaped her eye and tracked through the fur of her cheek. "I am Astra," she said, "commander of the Vanguard." Astra, Luther tested the name. It felt heavy on his tongue. "Nice name. Sounds expensive." He looked around the room, at the elite guards, at the flowers, weird glowing alien flowers piled in the corner. "Why are you all here?" Luther asked. "Did I commit a crime?" "No," Astra said. She reached out and, breaking all protocol, took his human hand in her large clawed one. She squeezed it. "We are here because we are waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" Luther laughed. It was a confused, simple sound. "I'm just a janitor," Astra smiled. It was a sad, broken smile, but it was full of warmth. "Yes," she whispered. "You are just a janitor." Luther looked at her smile. And suddenly a spark jumped across the wiped synapse of his brain. Not a memory of a name, not a memory of a war, but a feeling, a sensory echo, the sound of a laugh that sounded like a bark turning into a melody. Luther squeezed her hand back. He didn't know why, but he knew he didn't want to let go. "I don't remember this station," Luther said, looking into her blue eyes. "I don't remember how I got this scar." He paused, tilting his head. "But I remember your laugh," Luther said softly. "It sounds like holding your breath." Astra froze. Her eyes went wide. Then she threw her head back and laughed, a wet, choked sound of pure relief that filled the sterile room. "Yes," she said, pressing his hand to her forehead. "It sounds exactly like that." Luther smiled, settling into the pillows. He didn't know who he was really. But looking at the wolf woman holding his hand, he figured he must have done a pretty good job cleaning up whatever the mess was. "Well," Luther said, closing his eyes. "Wake me up when the shift starts. I think I'm going to sleep well tonight." Outside the window, the stars of Glimmer Spoke burned cold and bright, but inside the room, for the first time in 10,000 years, the silence was warm.